This is my first time being on a show with the Godless engineer.
He said
Excited in the presence of greatness.
uno momento.
Sorry, my mouse died on me. What's up, heathens? How y'all doing?
What's up, man? How are you?
Pretty good. How are y'all doing?
We're talking
Good.
about
Nice to meet you. We've never met before.
Yeah, it's good meeting y'all.
Yeah, we're talking about Jesus being a myth, but real quick, GE, I know you've been on our platform a few times, but this is Betty Buddha. She co-hosts with us all the time, and then we got Pat Lowinger, which is about to do a show with Betty Buddha, and is a very, very great supporter and contributor to our channel. But we're talking about mythicism, and I'm saying Jesus is a myth. G. I'm saying Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, I'm right there with you. I mean, I feel like it's far more plausible that Jesus is a myth than him being like a historical figure.
Oh, for sure. And what was like I had several people message me about like did you see what whole and I got nothing, and I know you same for you, nothing but love for Holy Kool-Aid, and he did that video. It was like, oh, did you see Holy Kool-Aid's video? I was like, no. Did you see GE's video to Holy Kool-Aid's video? Because he very respectfully, you know, like a professional, like a gentleman, corrected the shit the way it should have been done. And make it, the biggest thing is what is the standard of evidence? Like, how are you going to do that? And is it consistent across the board? So you hear theists all the time talk about, well, we have the same evidence for Abraham Lincoln or George Washington or blah blah blah. Well, no, you don't, because when you start getting into apologetic arguments, they go to embarrassment, or you know, there's 3 or 4 other arguments they'd love to hang their hats on. Nobody does that with the presidents.
Yeah, no, true. They don't. And honestly, I find the arguments for historical Jesus to be pretty weak. And I mean, I thought it was kind of funny how Holy Kool-Aid, you know, went, I guess, the full 9 and got Bart Ehrman on his channel, and in order to establish a historical Jesus. But I mean, that turned out to be a bit of a dumpster fire, in my opinion. That video, and for some reason, Holy Kool-Aid decided to put my face up in this video amongst like actual scholars, historical scholars. So it kind of caught me off guard. It's like, why the fuck am I up there? Like, Holy Kool-Aid didn't even put Raphael Lataster up there, which Raphael Lataster and Richard Carrier are the only 2 historians that have peer-reviewed monographs about the topic. So I feel like Raphael Lataster should have definitely went up there before my fat ass did.
and before we go any further, I do feel like it's my left, probably your right shoulder. Do I see like some Assyrian or Aryan?
Yeah. Well, so that right back there's Marduk, and that's Humbaba, the mask.
Okay. Yeah, I was like, I'm familiar now. The more and more I've got to know Dr. Josh, I'm like, I know.
And there's Jesus behind him too. The little
Jesus
doll,
is
right?
there.
Jesus.
But also, if you'll notice, I've also got the Thanos gauntlet. So, you know, to make me snap us out of existence.
Sweet.
All right. Well, what I'm going to do is we do have 4 atheists. No, I do believe that we have similar but some opposing ideas. So if anybody wants to bring them up, because I think GE and I are pretty similar in our approach to it. But if you guys want to chat for a minute, I'm gonna put a link up and actually open this up. And if there's anybody here now or in the Discord that wants to come on with us live and talk about mythicism. And I'll tell you right now that Jesus is a goddamn myth. And I'll be aggressive, and I'll let GE be the nice guy, and I'll tell you, I'll, I'll be the asshole. But we can do that. But Pat or Biddy, anything you guys want to chat with GE with, or ask any questions as I put the link out there?
No, I mean, I think it's going to be an interesting conversation. As far as, I think the hard mythicist position is somewhat untenable, but I'm okay with it.
Well, so as far as like, what are you considering hard mythicist position? Because
That
I mean,
there's no historical basis for this. Is the academic distinction and
so
designation. The hard mythicist position being that there's no historical basis to attribute to Jesus, that there being at least some kernel of a historical basis. Because I'm a mythicized Jesus. I don't believe there's a historical Jesus per se. I'm of the Jesus being a chimeral and then highly mythicized character, which leads to the formation of the movement that we identify as Christianity in the first century.
sorry, I had something playing in my ear.
I'm sorry.
I was frantically trying to turn it off. But I mean, like, because just for argument's sake, I don't say like I'm not like a 0%, 100% kind of person on this.
Okay. Right. Okay.
So I mean, I take the more minimal mythicist route of there being like, a 33% chance of there being a historical Jesus. But so I feel the most probable solution, I guess, or the most probable answer is that he was a myth. And that's, I mean, there's a lot that goes into that, like a lot of foundational evidence and everything that I don't know, maybe we can discuss, but I mean, basically to me, I feel like if you cannot actually discern any kind of real historical information about this Jesus character, then there's nothing that you can really lean on to say that he did exist in history. When it comes down to it, the only evidence you have are ambiguous verses in Paul that you could possibly twist into historical references, and that's it. And so I feel like that, compared with other historical figures, leads us to the idea that mythicism is more probable than historicity.
Which historical figures are you talking about that we're going to compare to?
Well, I mean, so typically, whenever this gets brought up in discussions, I mean, people often claim that the evidence for Jesus is as good or better than like emperors at the time. So, like, we're talking Julius Caesar, Tiberius Caesar, Alexander the Great, even Spartacus gets brought up. So, I mean,
No, that's an idiotic position. We'll agree on that.
Okay.
Right? But what about what about minor historical figures that are believed to exist, particularly in the region and time period of if there was a historical kernel, like other messianic figures in Palestine in the first century, right? So like Judas the Galilean, what's your position on him? Was he an actual historical person?
Let's see, I believe Judas Galilean was mentioned by Josephus, right?
Right. But he's being mentioned 60 years after he supposedly lived, right?
Well, yeah, but I mean, it's I don't have any reason to think that particular passage in Josephus is like tampered with or interpolated or anything.
Right.
I'm not exactly all up on the number of eyewitness testimonies for Judas the Galilean, but I mean, even if we had that from Josephus, I think that you would have a pretty strong case for historicity. But I mean, we don't have that.
my asking is what's your position though? Do you based on the singular account in Josephus discussing Judas the Galilean, are you okay with, even though he's described as a messianic figure of the period who led a revolt against the Roman state, are you okay with that being at least reasonably restored reliable? I'm not talking about certainty. I'm just saying, as a historian, would you say more likely than not, right?
Well, to be
it
fair,
actually
I'm only
happened.
an amateur. I would classify myself as a severe amateur historian, but
Right.
I mean, I'm perfectly fine accepting that Judas the Galilean was a historical figure, even if it's based on that one account. But I mean, I feel like that even that is better than the evidence that we have for Jesus.
And it may be. I'll give you, because one thing not attributed to Judas the Galilean is all this supernatural causation and attachments that are made.
Mhm.
With that, like, there's quite a few, and I'll just pick another one off the top of my head. I think it's Simon of Perea, right? Again, someone else that we don't have a whole lot. I mean, honestly, if I got my Josephus on the back, but I'm not going to pull it out. I think it's like this big. It's very short passage
Mhm.
regarding this guy, and it discusses a little bit of what he does, but at least on that position, again, more likely than not that the account is somewhat reasonable. We can rely on it and assume that there's some historical credibility to it, even though it's coming quite a bit after the incidents it portrays, right?
Yeah, I don't have a
Josephus, for
problem.
example.
I don't have a problem with time, like the time frames or anything like that. I mean, Alexander the Great, the best biography we have about him comes 400 years after his death, and it was written by Arian. But the thing is that Arian used eyewitness accounts about Alexander the Great.
Right. Right.
So
Arian actually names his sources, and we know those sources existed outside of Arian's account because other historians refer to them. I mean,
right,
so I would say yes, we have very good information, and it's not just we have a lot of stuff besides the historical accounts that are written down about Alexander's life in inscriptions, dedicatory monuments. I mean, there's a wealth of
right.
non-documented evidence, if we want to call it, but inscriptions and just iconography that would verify it. I mean, even Persian records about their own conquest would,
Right.
in some cases, support.
But you see, my point is that the only evidence that we have of this Jesus person ever existing comes from Paul. Paul clearly segregates himself from any historical sourcing he could hope to have, and Paul only says that he only knows this information because he either hallucinated it or he read it in the scriptures. So I feel like, given that, and there's no other references to Jesus that would be considered independent or non-interpolated or non-tampered with or anything like that. I mean, considering that is legit our only evidence, I feel like it's pretty sketch, Jesus's historicity.
Okay. My next question for you to be: so you don't attribute any historical, and I'm not going to say reliability, but there being some historical evidence that can be pulled out of the New Testament. I want to leave Paul's letters, particularly his genuine ones, aside, because Paul never actually says he can attest to a living, walking, talking Jesus. All of his
Right.
stuff is post-secondary. But let's just start with like the earliest gospel account. Again, I'm not arguing of known authorship. I'm fully in the school that the authors of the gospel accounts are unknown. But do you think the gospel accounts in themselves support or support or hurt your argument?
I don't think they hurt my argument, and I don't think that they support my argument either.
So all
Because
four of those accounts, let me finish. So all four of those accounts are based on, even though they are given as attestations of a historical person, you're saying that all four of those people falsely represented the historicity of some guy, although I will agree that he's highly mythicized, but they're all saying that this guy is a myth. All four of them
well,
are
no,
lying,
I feel
basically,
like
that
that's a
they actually know he
misrepresentation
existed.
of what they actually do, because nobody would say that they represent him as a myth. The Gospels were an attempt to euhemerize Jesus into history, and I mean,
Right.
even if you just look at Mark's Gospel, Mark is a very adoptionist gospel. So Mark starts off
Correct.
with the baptism, and that's when this archangel Messiah figure, inhabits this person we know as Jesus, and pretty much skin walks around with him, and then ascends back up
Right.
into heaven once he gets crucified. And so the clearest indication that we're given about where the information that appears in the gospel comes from is actually in Matthew, because Matthew attributes just about every major point in Jesus's life, I guess, to something in Scripture, and it says that this was done to fulfill Scripture, and so all throughout, like it points back to Scripture. So, in my opinion, the bulk, if not nearly all of the Gospels are derived from the Old Testament. They're recontextualized Old Testament stories, and the whole like a lot of the theology of Jesus is a syncretism between Zoroastrianism as well as other Hellenistic and pagan ideas with Judaism.
Right, but that's not the argument you're actually making. You're
I
not.
feel like I've
You're,
just made that
I'm
argument.
fully. I'm. Well, I mean, but you're saying that Mark's account isn't talking about a historical person. Do we just reject Mark entirely as a? I'm not saying I believe anything in it. What I'm saying is Mark, at least the unknown author of Mark, is projecting what they believe to be a historical account. And I agree that it's fully an adoptionistic account. I mean, there's no better argument for adoptionism than Mark's account, right? I mean, that's part of the reason the adoptionists of the 2nd and 3rd century are going to point to Mark's gospel, right, to defend their creedal statements. But the author believed that even from an adoptionist point of view, that there was a Jesus. Now, he would say that the Christ is a separate person. And if you're an adoptionist, that's how you'd approach the text, right? But
Right.
that Jesus, there was a dude, there was a guy. And whether or not Mark is accounting to anything said, remember, Mark's pretty early. I start my analysis of Christianity with Mark and not with Paul, because
Okay.
Mark is actually, I think Mark's a better source than Paul, because frankly, Paul's all about self-aggrandizement, because Paul has a overt political and theological agenda to be equated with the founders of Christianity. He wants to make
Mark uses
himself and
Paul
his
to
movement.
generate his story, so I don't understand why Mark,
He uses,
somebody that
but
copied Paul, is
Mark's not
better
the.
than Paul.
When you said he copied Paul, are you saying that he literally? I understand he used passages from Paul, but are you saying that the author of Mark, even though he talks about a lot of things Paul never discusses at all, you're saying he lifted those accounts out of Paul and had no
Nope, that's
other
not what I
external
said.
sources?
It would really
Right,
behoove you to repeat things that I actually say. I said that Mark copied from Paul, meaning Mark used Paul as a source to inform his theology and story of Jesus. That's what I mean.
Sure.
And that's what I said.
So what other sources did Mark use?
I don't know. I don't know.
Right,
He probably used some oral tradition. But see, so my point
Right.
in this whole Mark thing is that Mark starts off with the concept that the Messiah is an archangel figure in heaven that descends and becomes this corporeal body, and then does all the things, and then ascends back up into heaven. So the actual Messiah figure, forget Jesus. Jesus is a placeholder name, right? I mean, the meaning of Jesus is very symbolic, and this is a key indication that this Jesus character, whether or not there was like some kind of real historical figure that it was based on, the Jesus figure that everybody knows about is mythical in general. But so with Mark's gospel, what you have is they are using oral traditions. They're also using Paul's work in order to create their story. But how do you parse out what is historical in Mark? What is the methodology that you use to say this is true about Jesus in Mark?
I say you take a minimalist perspective of it. I think you have to you try to distill
That's just
everything
ad
that's
hoc
Pauline
reasoning.
out. It's actually not. It's detailed historical analysis given the
No,
context.
it's not. It's ad hoc reasoning, because what you're saying is, like, look at Mark and you strip away all the supernatural stuff and look at the bare bones of Mark, and then whatever's bare bones of Mark is what's true about Jesus. Is that what I'm understanding?
I didn't say that, and I say
Okay.
each of the elements that you would parse out, you have to look within both the social and societal norms of the period, and see whether or not there's any movement that, like, first of all, the synchronistic element makes this analysis difficult, because how do you distill synchronicity? How do you take out the Greek versus taking out the Syrian, taking out the native Jewish elements of this movement, right? That's the real difficulty. So with Mark, Mark specifically, if you were a Gentile and you were writing this story of this messianic Jewish figure that you think is now the savior of, the Gentiles as well as the Jews, you can see Mark's gospel being the instrument of that. Remember, in my opinion, and I don't think my opinion is different than many historians, the gospel in of itself is it's a piece of propaganda. It's preaching a theology of the Christian movement. So we don't have to argue. When Mark's writing his gospel, he is already a believer in the movement. He believes that Jesus, at least it appears in the text, he believes Jesus to be a historical person. And he's making the case for his theology within it, but he believes him to be a person through an adoptionistic system, which would then be very Greco-Roman, by the way, because that was a very Greco-Roman way of how people gain deific status in the Greek and Roman worlds. I mean, it wasn't uncommon. The emperors had just started doing it, 80 years before Mark's gospel. Remember, the first major this is why it's important, to look at the adoption of Augustus by Julius Caesar, and the fact that immediately after his adoption and then the death of Julius Caesar himself, Augustus mints coinage stating, "I am the son of the divine Julius," because Julius Caesar was believed to have had an apotheosis and become a god. This continues through the emperors up until the adoption of Christianity. So knowing that there was this common Greco-Roman theme of adoptionism for a divine ascension, looking at Mark's gospel, Mark believes, whether or not his sources are good, and if he is relying on oral tradition, he at least believes the nexus point of his religion is a historical person. Whether or not we can fully rely on that, then there's additional information coming out of other people that this conflation could have occurred, right? That there are other people in this movement.
Right. Now, so other than Jesus's existence, name one true fact about Jesus contained in Mark.
A true fact? That there
what I mean is, like, you've laid out this methodology for parsing out the fiction from the truth in Mark. Right. All I'm asking is, besides his existence, what can you point to in Mark that is like true about Jesus, or is most likely true about Jesus?
And real quick, Pat, as you think about that, I'm going to bring one another person on screen here.
Yeah, it's the TANG gang.
All right, we got Damien, the GFAD.
Hello.
In the building. Go ahead, Pat, answer the question. We can move on from there, and then.
And again, my position is a minimalist position. I believe the best and most accurate thing that can be said about Jesus, and again, whether or not you want to say he's of Nazareth or not, that's just an additional identifier to him. But Jesus was, at most we can discern about the movement, is that in the first century, and we can't even say exactly what days, because I don't think we can actually give a date for Jesus' death either, that there was a highly mythologized person who led a messianic movement during an apocalyptic prophet per se, in the first century Palestine, that later gets attributed all this supernatural causation and conflation, right? Like, because one of the other things we know is like other people like Judas the Galilean, Simon of Perea, they don't have this divinity attached to them. So I don't think Jesus is any less likely than someone like Judas the Galilean. And frankly, I think those two characters are extremely conflated. But I'm not saying other than there is more likely than not some minimalist person that later had a massive amount of supernatural and largely invented works, miracles, and things associated with them. But I think even from Mark's account, you have to say that there was a movement that later formed into Christianity. People weren't running around worshiping Judas the Galilean, Simon of Perea. We look at other historical narratives where there were similar cultic activities in the Greco-Roman world, like again Apollonius of Tyana. Now, whether or not you think Apollonius of Tyana is a historical person, I think he is. I think he's highly mythicized. I think 90% of anything written about him is largely suspect, and it leads to supernatural causation. And I wouldn't say that that we can discount his existence either, because we do know there was a movement associated with him as well that grew beyond his death. So that's where I'm talking about the kernel of a historical reality. And I would agree with you. We didn't even know if this guy's name was Jesus. And I think there's a really good argument to be made that Jesus, whoever this guy was, who in this adoptionist viewpoint that Mark gives, whether or not his name could have been changed to make the story even better, right? I mean, but there was obviously in this period some type of messianic movement that at least one or more people were attributed to that later were unified into a single coalescence that becomes Christianity.
So how is this not ad hoc? I don't see you tying
an entire analysis.
No. I don't see you tying
you
any of those conclusions to actual evidence that we have, other than these other people existed, like the different messiahs that Josephus writes about. These other people existed, so that means that this guy probably existed, and like that just seems like an ad hoc argument to me.
So by the same attraction, we don't know how tampered with Josephus' text is. I mean, I'm in agreement that it was highly tampered with, right? So we really can't use Josephus as a source. We know by the end of the right, exactly. We don't know exactly, even then, I mean, you have to be, and we don't know where other scribes altered the text as well. I mean, one of the problems with analyzing ancient texts is we go in looking at like, why is this account read wrong? We have no reason to even suspect that, let's just say, for example, whether or not a 12th century scribe altered the text of Josephus when it came to Judas the Galilean, right? Because it really doesn't, we don't know. I mean, it seems unlikely, but we don't know if the text was altered, so we assume the text is correct. But when it comes to Josephus's account of Jesus, again, the text reads disingenuously. There's really good reason to suspect the text has been altered. The entirety of analysis, and you want to say ad hoc, and I actually think, this is historiography. This is looking at a cross section of evidence, and this is it's not like you can point to a single point of evidence, right? This is what was common in the period. There was a movement that came out of it that many of the people in an oral tradition projected back to an actual historical person. But we lack any real textual evidence at all. And I agree with you. But by the end of the first century, the movement was such that people projecting it believed that this person was historical, right? And whether or not we can actually say this person is the same guy, that's difficult. But there definitely was a movement, and how this movement gets started. If you want to say, if you're a Paulinist that says Paul invented it whole cloth and he invented the Jesus character, I'm not against that argument either. But I think that argument is, if you're going to offer that argument, then you need to go through the same historical analysis and not engage in what you would call ad hoc reasoning. But I would say that, you have to understand how these cultic movements worked in the first century BC, in the first century AD, and understand that this is a period of a lot of civil and social unrest in the Roman world. And, I'm not even convinced that Jesus was crucified. I think it's plausible. I mean, if you had somebody coming into Rome preaching a lot of nonsense about there being a restoration of the state of Israel, and he gets executed. I think the Romans were just doing their job. But I'm not even sure on that, because we had a lot of people crucified by the Romans who were messianic figures, either not, maybe not crucified per se, but they were executed by the state for specifically leading insurrections against the state. So it's not difficult to say that at least some people believed that this guy was historical. Whether or not we can actually get to pinpoint down a guy that his mother and father was Mary and Joseph, I actually think that's not the minimalist position.
Can I ask?
I'm only adopting the minimalist position.
Well, let me ask this: do you think that just because people believe something, that means that it's true?
No, I don't, particularly when it comes out. But I'm kind of interested. I mean, you've asked me a lot of questions. How do we get to a mythical Jesus? How did mythicism begin?
How did mythicism begin?
Right.
I mean, those are two different questions there. I mean,
it's actually not. What's the
no, it totally
point?
is, because if you're talking about how did no, hold on. If you're talking about how did mythicism begin, meaning the modern mythicist movement, then I mean you're not going back very far. But
no, I'm to clarify, I'm asking you specifically the
how did we
issue on how did the mythical Christian movement start? Right.
So basically what happened was, and we have evidence of this in Philo of Alexandria as well as Paul, what we have is the Jews were mining the Old Testament scriptures for information about the coming Messiah. And what Philo does is he connects all the dots. He's working on syncretizing Judaism with these Hellenistic ideas, and he comes up with his Logos idea. And Paul, independently from Philo, also comes up with the same idea, but he calls it Jesus. And so all of this was done by mining the scriptures as well as getting hallucinations from this supposed Jesus figure. And so that's what Paul says. And I really don't understand why you would think that Mark is a better source for Jesus than Paul, considering Mark is writing in the 70s, Paul's writing in the 50s, and his information comes from even earlier than that. So what you're talking about is you trust a document that was written 40 years after Jesus supposedly died, completely surpasses the earliest documents that we have, and in fact actually uses the earlier documents that we already have. So it just kind of seems weird to me to think that is more historical than just going with the earliest source that we have.
Right, because one of the issues is you can see the inherent bias in Paul's advocacy for his form of Christianity. That's one of the problems. So when you detect biases in a document, right?
And the Gospels aren't biased?
I'm saying they're all biased. But we're looking again, and when you said 70, that's the terminal date for the accepted authorship and period. But how far is Mark from Paul? I mean, a decade, 15 years?
20 years,
most, right? So 20 years is the maximum,
50
right?
is 20 years.
Right, but 70 is the terminal date that authors accept. They most scholars put Mark between 65 and 70, right?
Right around in that area.
And
but I don't think that big of a
when's Paul supposed to? When's his last works roughly supposed to be attributed?
Early 60s.
Right. So in the best case scenario, we're really using the minimal, not taking the maximal, but taking the median. We're about a decade from Paul to Mark, right? And you have to take the earliest Paul and the maximal Mark to get that 20-year period.
Maybe, right? but what I can't get past, and maybe you can help me with that.
Right.
What I can't get past is the fact that Mark uses Paul as a source. So when you use Mark as a source, you can't use it as an independent source, because the only independent source we have is Paul.
Well, and then I would also argue that Mark doesn't even have access to all of Paul. From what we can tell, I mean, again, I'm 6 beers into this.
How would you know that?
Because we look at the theology, right? We can't we look. This isn't my work. This isn't my scholarship. This is other people's scholarship. This is not my area of expertise. I've just read quite a bit on it. You go through and you do a detailed analysis. Metzger and other people did this, where they're looking through gospels like Mark, right? And I'm sure you don't like Metzger's work, right? But these are people that are, and again, whether or not you like Ehrman and other people, and I've read Carrier's work. I like Carrier, but this is the issue: is that you got to try to figure out where Mark was getting his stuff, and we can't always figure it out. But we don't even we can't even. I mean, I think it's kind of to say Mark just used Paul. I agree with you, he did, but how much Paul did Mark use? We really can't determine that yet, right? So there,
Well,
and
no,
we do know that
don't think
there's
that
all kinds of
matters.
hypotheses about source material. Well, but just
I
saying
don't think
something's
it
earlier
matters.
doesn't mean it's better, right? I mean, you used Arian as a source for Alexander the Great, and that's 400
Yeah.
years later, right?
Right.
Mark
But yeah,
may have
but you're
didn't-
missing a crucial thing there. Can you tell me
Right.
the crucial thing that you're missing in the Arian deal?
Arian cites his sources and Mark doesn't.
What sources does Arian cite?
Cite sources that were well known and already attested to in the historical record. I already went.
No. That's not what I'm looking for. He cites eyewitness sources for Alexander the Great. He uses
Correct, but
eyewitness
Mark
sources.
never does that.
No,
Right.
Mark never does that. He never cites his sources.
I agree.
He never tells us where
I
he
agree.
gets his information from. Paul, he
Right.
does use Paul. Paul never identifies anybody as knowing Jesus while he was on earth. Paul never identifies anybody as being part of Jesus's ministry. So all like the later gospels invent that whole idea that Jesus
So
had a ministry.
Are you asserting that Paul, in his authentic letters, never talks about the truce of Jerusalem and the other apostles?
No, that's not what I said. I specifically said.
So right. So Paul specifically makes reference to other people who, quote unquote, would have firsthand experience with Jesus.
No, he doesn't.
Who were, quote unquote, he talks about the apostles who were Jesus
The
when he was
apostle
alive.
does not mean disciple.
Paul, again, he talks about those who had been with Jesus, and that his apostleship, his revelation, was just as good as those who had been and seen Jesus in the flesh, because he had seen him in the spirit. Didn't he?
No, that's not what Paul says. Paul does not say that. Quote me verse where Paul talks about.
Again, I'm not going to. He doesn't ever say he saw Jesus in the flesh. Paul actually says he didn't see Jesus in the flesh.
Right. No, you just said, maybe I misunderstood you. You just said that Paul cites people that saw Jesus in the flesh.
He cites those who had been with Jesus. And the most direct translation of that is those who had been with him.
Quote me a verse.
Temporally,
right?
Where
in Paul's writings does he say that?
Well, okay, so if I'm going to pull out my lexicon, I think we should set this up for a debate for another day, because I was just asked, it was 10 minutes before this, but the issue is Paul actually protests, and then if we actually follow Galatians, Paul's talking about people like Peter and others who were associated with the movement that were separate and distinct from himself, who were quotably the earlier apostles of Jesus, right? So Paul attributes to people being before him in the faith. So Paul's creation of the faith is at least he's a competitor at best, right? So Paul makes attestation that he's not the first. When Paul's letter to the Romans, he specifically talks about those who had been in Rome establishing churches before him as well, right? Paul's defending his creedal statement in the book of Romans because he's defending, hey, you may have heard some negative things about me, but let me tell you what I believe, right? And one of the things he specifically attributes is to Jesus being the Messiah and having come to earth in Romans, right?
He never says about Jesus coming to earth, but
okay. Well, let me pull it up. Give me a second. Go on to some other people. I'll get my lexicon out.
Okay. I do need to go here in a second because my wife's actually already in bed, and so I need to get down there before I have to sleep on the couch. She wouldn't really make me sleep on the couch. I was just joking. So if I can bring something up, apostle does not mean disciple. According to Paul, what makes you an apostle is getting a vision of Jesus. What makes you a disciple would be actually walking and talking with Jesus. So apostleship just means that you've had a vision of Jesus and you're spreading the gospel message. And the gospel message would be what's in 1 Corinthians 15, 3-8. Just that Jesus died, was buried, resurrected, and absolved sins and everything like that. So there's an important distinction there between apostle and disciple. Just because Paul identifies people as apostles does not mean that they were disciples of Jesus.
Correct. What's up, Damien?
Hello, everyone. Maybe for the third time because I've kept on dropping in and out. I'm actually driving at the moment. So, hey, Beauty Buddha, good to see you again. Godless Engineer, good to catch up with you again. Oz, hey guys, and that must be Pat. Hello, Pat.
It must be Pat.
It must be Pat. It has to be Pat. It can't be anyone else but Pat. So I started listening after I got out of work, and so I came in about halfway through, and I thought it was like from the parts that I picked up, it was a very cordial chat, and yeah, when I get a chance, I'll happily sit through the whole thing. But I suppose for me, I personally would line up with Dr. Carrier. There are some things he says that I.
Damien got raptured.
So what Damien was saying is he aligns with the Carrier and Jesus is a myth.
Yeah.
That's what happened. You know, it's amazing. Obviously, Biddy and Pat and Damien G, like these are my friends, and we were having some fun earlier. I was like, I'm just gonna start a stream because I've been catching all kinds of shit on Facebook, private message, and Twitter, and private message on the mythicist position, because the more I've studied, and I've finally come to a point where I'm very, very confident in my position, and I've got all kinds of shit. I'm like, I'm gonna open up, like, bring it. Like, I want to see how strong my argument is. None of the Christians on Facebook or Twitter or Discord, not one of them showed up.
You have one in the chat room right now.
Where?
I believe. Isaiah Ben Yahweh.
Yeah, apparently mythicism is a stupid argument. I don't know.
Well, I mean, the link is. Let me double check. Yeah, the link's at the top. The link's at the top. It's pinned. The link is pinned at the top of the chat. If that's how you feel, come defend your position. In other words, holla at your boy.
They just wanted to make their opinion known, and then they dipped.
GE, are you going to be in Austin this weekend?
No.
God damn it.
I know, I'm sorry. But I do need to go and get to bed because I've got work like early in the morning. So I know Pat, I think, is searching for quotes and stuff or Bible verses. I hate to ask you to do this, Odds, but if he comes back on, can you give him my email, john@godlessengineering.com?
Yep. Yeah, I got your email. I'll give it to him. Yep.
Okay. Because I'll
be back. Yeah, but again, I'm going through the original Greek because I don't want to mistranslate it, right? So it's going to take me more than like 2 minutes to pop it out.
Oh no, that's fine.
Again, it's
prefer to
also going to
disagree.
be whether or not you're going to take the maximal or minimalist position on the translation too, because we're going to use Greek. We'll have to agree on which Greek lexicon we're going to use, because as far as whether or not we're going to assume that how we're going to interpret phrases like manifested in the flesh, right? Are you going to say that that's only, like Carrier interprets that as kind of loosely, manifest in the flesh just means appearing solely to Paul versus having actually been born, right? Because there is different ways to
that's
interpret
because
that in Greek.
of the word used there for it, because the
Correct.
word
And that's-
used
and
is
that's what I'm-
manufactured
or created, right? So
right.
again, we can't, this is one thing and again, I don't want to do, we should probably do this another time when I haven't had 3 tall
That's
boys
fine.
and I prepared for it. I don't usually defend this argument, right? These are books I've read years ago.
Okay.
But I do think it's important to, if we're going to actually get down into the very Greek, and if we're going to take translations, we're going to take primary, secondary, and tertiary translations and usages and discuss them and go through them. Carey does, if I remember, it's been years since I read it, Carrier does a pretty good job of that. But one of the critiques of his book is that he often adopts secondary and tertiary translations of Greek from the Greek lexicon in order to support his argument. And until I have a chance to go back and research that, I'm not saying I'm saying what other people have made as criticisms, right? I'm not saying those are my criticisms, because I haven't verified them in a long time, right?
Well, I mean, I would say that you do have to take into account how these first century Jews considered the celestial realm to exist,
I agree.
being that it's a physical place, and they were they were physical beings that were in a physical place. And so God manufacturing a body for Jesus is totally different than him, being born. So not
every Jew in first century Palestine thought the same way as every other Jew in first century Palestine. That's important for us to discuss as well.
That's all. Yes, I would definitely agree. That's also very important. Mm-hmm.
Right. So if you want to revisit this another time.
Yeah, definitely. Because this sounds like
again, like I said, I'm a minimalist on historicity, so I want to present the best minimalist argument rather than doing it off the cuff without having researched it. But I do think that, and again, discounting Mark and saying, well, we can't rely on Mark because it's later than Paul. I think Paul isn't necessarily a bad source, but I think you have to be careful when using Paul.
I think I smell a Tang.
Debate, maybe.
UDC debate with the champion bringing his belt.
Yeah,
the champion bringing his belt to the ring.
Who's the champion?
Yeah, I'll definitely take up that challenge. But yeah, sure. Just let me know whenever you can, and we'll see what we can get scheduled. And so yeah, we'll set that up.
Cool. Thanks for hanging out, G. Right. Appreciate it, man.
See you guys later.
Peace out, homie.
What I'm saying is Jesus wrote a dinosaur to work. That's history. It's in the Bible. How to Train Your Dragon.
Historical facts.
And if you don't believe it, do your own research. Pull up Google.